and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World, and of course with me are Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. We're going to be taking a look at two important stories today. The first is of course in reference to the developments regarding the caretaker setup and of course the upcoming general elections. The ECP has spoken about the fact that delimitations are going to be processed, and because of that a lot of the question marks that were being raised as to whether or not the 90-day time period is going to be observed seems to be put at bay. But there are of course still concerns as to what is going to be the constitutional requirement on the matter. There is of course a petition also in the Supreme Court by the Bar Association, which has also talked about the constitutional aspects of this particular decision. And then we also heard parties such as the PTI and the PPP also talking about timely elections and saying that it is under the constitution that the 90-day time period is respected and not that there needs to be new delimitations in the process. So of course much of that remains to be seen, and of course in addition to that we also saw that the interim Prime Minister of Pakistan has made a number of decisions regarding his cabinet, and many ministers have also taken oath today. So we're going to be taking a look at this decision as well, and moving forward how exactly will that now impact different sectors and the way forward by the caretaker setup, especially given the fact that this is now something that will probably be in place for longer than 3 months. We're also going to be taking a look in our next segment at what is going on within the region, especially with regards to the kind of clashes that we have seen in Manipur, in India, and we've seen that there is of course a lot of communal violence to the point of a localized civil war, as many have been speaking about it, and especially what its relationship is going to be with the border region and with prospects of increase in clashes with war-torn Myanmar, and then of course with China as well, and the kind of implications that this has for India, both domestically and in terms of its foreign policy relations, not just with these two countries, but then also with regards to the US and how it wants to take it forward, and whether or not the current political setup in India is going to be taking this seriously, given the fact that the elections are upcoming next year. And historically we've also seen that the BJP benefits from these communal riots and the kind of polarization that exists, and also endeavors to increase it. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that in our show today. As of course we're going to be talking about this with Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. We've also been joined online by Sarwar Bari, who's a political analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Sarwar Bari, for joining us and being part of the discussion as well. And let's start with you, Farrukh, with reference to, of course, the big choices that we've seen coming out today. A lot of the decisions with regards to the cabinet we've discussed before, and we wanted to see that. Do any of those surprise you? Do you welcome the decisions? And moving forward, do you think that the kind of responsibilities that exist, the cabinet is equipped to handle that?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me first of all point out regarding our cabinet, the new cabinet that has taken oath. By virtue of being a caretaker set up, a caretaker cabinet, it is full of people who are professionals, right? What does that entail? Most of them come from working class. Most of them come from the professions that they are actually going to represent. I cannot pretend to know them all, but I've known many of them, right? Many of them I've known in professional capacity. Some of them I've known or I have the honor of calling my friends, and the other I know by, their performance or their reputation, right? So I would say that so far it is an impressive list of people who have actually been cobbled together. And essentially because I was pointing out that they are working hard-working people, decent people, and by virtue of being from working class, one thing that I can actually associate with and I can tell you is that we working class people usually adhere to the rules that are there, right? So what while we are going to talk about the delimitation and the timing of the election in coming segment, let me also point out that one thing is clear, that when it comes to their own efforts to meet a deadline, I think that most of them will be putting in an effort to actually keep it as close to the 90-day period as possible. Of course, there are systemic bottlenecks, there are other procedural problems that we are going to see. We cannot See, nobody can agree with everybody totally, but I think that when you have seen these people working and how much hardworking people they are, it is hard not to actually have a grudging, despite disagreements. It is hard not to have grudging respect for all of them. So I think that it was a very good choice. And let us see how this actually plays out. But regarding, Shamshad Akhtar's appointment as the finance minister for that matter, if you remember that she was the caretaker minister last time also. And at that time, had it not been for the miscalculation, financial miscalculation of PTI or lack of preparedness, I think that when she left, she had prepared the ground so much that the country could have really taken off at that time also. So I think that our international commitments again have found the kind of steward that we needed. And then Dr. Waqar Masood, before he had retired, of course, he used to be a permanent presence in the finance ministry. So that is also something that is going to be very important. I think it actually brings stability to the whole enterprise.
Right. And Sarwar Bari Saab, of course, I'd like your opinion as well before we talk about the issue with regards to delimitation, especially if you care to shed light on the decisions regarding, of course, the finance ministry and then the foreign ministry as well. Some aspects which are, of course, also stressed upon even before the caretaker setup had gotten in, that to be one of the topmost prerequisites or indicators of the kind of challenges that of course exist within the caretaker setup, given the IMF standby arrangement as well. When we talk about now who's going to be taking a look after this, still it seems the completion of the program, what do you think moving forward is going to be the strength in this cabinet that would help the circumstances and of course with our relationship with the IMF?
Well, I'm thankful to PTV World to invite me after a long time. And I also extend my congratulations to the new cabinet and to a new caretaker government. And I expect that they would play their constitutional role, but not drag on sitting in the government. So having said that, I'm happy to share with you that I know some of the new ministers who had no experience in the past of governance. But there are some people who have been like Waqar Masood has been permanent secretary, I think, in a way to in the Ministry of Finance. So let's see what is the performance of a new cabinet. I have my doubts because it's a continuity of the system, and I hope they would perform better, particularly in economic field arena, because we are suffering, our poor people are suffering. Inflation and price hike has brought miseries to the people of Pakistan, and I expect that the new government, caretaker government, would look into their problems and help them solve their issues.
Right, absolutely. And Sarwar Bari Saab, I want to explore further on what you said in terms of having any prior experience of governance, and I want to know whether or not that is something that is essential when we take a look at the caretaker setup and the way that, of course, we've seen the kind of multitude of experiences of different ministers that have taken oath today. It seems that they have had a professional experience, even if they hadn't had a governance experience. What do you think is perhaps more important at the moment, given the fact that it is a limited time, even if it is 90 days or more?
Well, I think the caretaker government must not take a single extra day as far as constitution is concerned, and I expect that they would stand to that and fulfill their constitutional duty to ensure that they provide full support to Election Commission of Pakistan so that we have credible elections. So that should be the top priority of the new caretaker government. And but I have my doubts especially because Election Commission of Pakistan, uh, uh, instead of uh, instead of announcing schedule for the election, the Election Commission has announced a schedule for the delimitation, and based on a census, a population census, which whose quality, in fact, was absolutely compromised because there is no census in the world, population census, which would take 5 months, because the information you gather from households in March, and the information you gathered from households in July, the situation might have changed, and there is always a likelihood of counting twice or thrice the same people.
Yeah.
So therefore, in many countries, in fact, most countries, including Turkey, the population census is completed in one day, not even weeks, in one day, and we took 5 months. And then the CCI, uh, constitution of CCI, is also questionable because two chief ministers did not have any constitutional legitimacy. So I believe that not only the quality of the census, but also its legitimacy is questionable. Therefore, Election Commission should have announced election schedule instead of announcing the delimitation schedule. So this is a recipe basically to prolong the caretaker duration, which is not a good sign.
Right, and Sarwar Bhai Sahab, these are important discussions, and I'll come to that, particularly in terms of the constitutional aspects of the two. But Faisal, first your input also with reference to the decisions that we have seen coming in of various ministers, and a number of names, of course, were being discussed prior to these decisions, and you, of course, also had your own recommendations to put forward as well.
They were met.
They were met. Some of them were met, yes. But when we take a look at, of course, the importance of how this needs to, of course, move forward in harmony, and how there needs to be important factors that need to be completed within a stipulated time period. Do you think that the choices then, of course, are also something that, again, are up to the task, but also more than that, are acceptable to the different political parties in terms of their abilities and in terms of their political inclinations, if any?
Yes, Sana, first of all, talking about the names which we've just seen today, that they are the cabinet ministers. I think the cabinet has been carefully selected, and I would agree with Farrukh that majority of them, of course, they are people from the field. And if we talk about, yesterday I did mention Sarfraz Bukti's name. He's our interior minister today, owing to the fact that he was interior minister of Balochistan in past. Plus, he's someone who, himself was a victim to a couple of terrorist attacks within Balochistan, and he knows how the system works, and he's the best fit for it. And the most important thing which I believe that this cabinet is having, it's more energetic and more vibrant from every aspect. And as we know that this time around, caretaker setup is empowered one. So we are believing that the more energetic people would be, of course, empowered. And as Bari Saab earlier mentioned, that ball is in the court of ECP. Same was the sentence by the previous former Prime Minister, obviously Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. He said the same thing. He said the ball is in the court of ECP, and ECP, of course, it prolongs. If it prolongs, then it would have nothing to do with the interim setup. The caretaker setup would only ensure that elections are free and fair. And of course, the call of the elections would be coming from the ECP. But here I am sort of, concerned about one factor, that of course we have democratic parties. Pakistan's democracy is much required by almost all of the political parties, and it would be quite interesting to see that what would be their reaction to if the date is prolonged, if the prolonged date is, more than which everybody is expecting that maybe few of the parties they are okay with 5 to 6 months, but if it is more than that, then what would be their reaction? That would be, quite interesting to see in coming.
Who's saying that it might be more than 4 or 5 months?
Because as we know that delimitation and census, the process might take around 4 to 5 months.
No, they have ECP has actually given volunteered a date. That is
given
December 12th.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's done now, and then of course
the final details of the delay.
Yeah, then
But
after
Farrukh,
that,
isn't
of
there a
course, it would
possibility
be.
of that also extending, even if there is a schedule?
Yeah, that is amazing because actually today ECP actually came forward and made a statement regarding their schedule as well, election schedule, and they said that we can actually volunteer a date till to September 12th, and if there is need, it can be further extended till September 20th. But the important thing is that we have been seeing that the and that is a very good news, by the way. The Chief Election Commissioner today met with the Chief Justice of Pakistan. So it is important to interpret law and then actually work together. I think that in the end, because Article 51(5) actually clearly states that the census results have been notified, then you have to actually go forward and conduct the delimitation exercise. And as long as there is a finite, and this is what I keep on saying, that if there is a finite limit to whatever is happening, then one can at least expect that there might be some delays, but there won't be that much that they actually derail the system or democracy itself.
All right, and Sarwar, Bari Sahab, does that seem encouraging to you, or give you hope that at least there is some sort of timeline that we're hearing about, and also link that with the kind of constitutional requirements that exist? And it seems that what we are moving forward with is that one takes precedence over the other, and the fact that there is now a new census in place, and if ECP is going forward with the delimitations, then it is not a necessity that the 90-day time period is respected.
And Bari Sahab, since you, and by the way, welcome back actually, good to see you after a long time. But regarding what you were saying earlier, delimitation deadline has been given that it will be at the start, during the start of December. Do you think the moment delimitation results are out, how much time after that it takes ECP to conduct the elections?
Well, as I earlier on said, that the way I read constitution and law, in my view, maximum days that election commission can take is 90 days after the dissolution of assembly, and it is very categorically written in Pakistan's constitution that the elections will take place not later than 90 days. But nowhere in our constitution and Elections Act 2017 it is written that election commission can overrule that and can announce schedule for the delimitation, and that would mean that the election will not take place within 90 days. Now, I think it's very, very important to understand that why this is being done. As I earlier on also said, that taking 5 months to complete the census, even which is controversial and flawed in my view, because its quality was compromised in at least at 12% households. They reported, according to a survey, that the enumerators did not carry the digital tab which was provided to them, and they did not conduct geo-tagging at all.
Right,
So,
Bari Sahab, which survey is that?
This is a survey conducted by Express Tribune and published about 2 weeks back in a Sunday magazine. We also conducted a sample which shows about 10% households telling that the either census numerators did not turn up to their houses, or they registered their details on a register, not on a tab. So using such a census, such a flawed census for delimitation, is nothing else, in my view, rather than to delay the conduct of elections in
Right, and
Pakistan.
Bari Sahab,
And
this brings
I
another
think
question in mind. If you can also care to answer that, that is the CCI then not in place to also then make sure that when it ratifies the results, that it ensures that the quality is upheld?
And by the way, just to
well,
qualify this, CCI, Bari Sahab,
quality of census
Bari
must
Sahab,
be.
Bari Sahab, regarding CCI's own importance, I understand that there must be some issues regarding, as you have pointed out, regarding census, but once it has been vetted by CCI, does it not become obligatory for the Election Commission to carry out those delimitations?
Election Commission can't continue on its schedule, because holding elections within 90 days is categorically stated in our constitution. So I believe that Supreme Court of Pakistan may basically ask Election Commission to announce the election schedule without delimitation, because it has already started a controversy in Pakistan. Various political parties who were part of the PDM coalition, they have started questioning the census results. And secondly, if you look at this is also mind-boggling for me, because the proportion of population of various provinces between 2017 and 2023 has not changed at all, while our population has gone up by almost 4 crore, and the population growth rate has reached 2.55%, and except few districts where population has either declined or increased, the delimitation is not needed to do at the national level. It could have been done at few districts level, because
Right.
at the provincial level the seats are not going to come down or increase, because the
Right.
proportion of population growth or the proportion of population across provinces remained the same as of 2017.
Right, absolutely, sir. Now, could you answer my earlier question regarding the finalization or delimitation, and how much time after that it takes Election Commission to conduct elections? I understand your concern is regarding 90 days, and that is there, but now that the Election Commission has given a date that the results of delimitations are going to be notified by the start of December, how much time does it take in practical
It is
terms?
very interesting. You have to start calculating 90 days from the day assembly was dissolved. So
No,
the
no,
90
I'm not
days
talking
will
about,
come to an end,
I'm not talking
while
about the
delimitation.
constitutional aspect.
Let me
I'm
finish.
talking about the practical aspects, sir,
Sir, let
because
me
you are
finish.
also in the
Please
field
let me
and you
complete my
study the
argument.
elections.
So if Election Commission starts counting the day from the completion of the delimitation, that is 12th of December, then of course 13th of December, if Election Commission counts 90 days, which will be absolutely illegal, unethical, then of course elections will take
Three months
place after
after.
March, April.
Okay.
Right, absolutely, and that is the timeline that we were looking at. But Bari Sahab, I missed the earlier part with regards to my question regarding CCI's ratification and ensuring the quality. What is your opinion on that? Is it not the CCI's job to go ahead with it?
No, two members of the CCI, the Chief Minister of Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, had no legal constitutional legitimacy to sit in the meeting. So and under the constitution, the approval of the census results has no political and constitutional and ethical foundations.
All right, I got my answer. Thank you very much, Sarwar Bari Sahab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Farrukh, there is of course the issue with regards to the delimitations and of course new census results, but I also want to know specifically then how the different political parties are going to go ahead with it. And we know that of course the PTA has talked about it before, and the PPP has also stressed upon the fact that there needs to be timely elections, but at the same time there is also reports coming in on the value of the new census results that it brings in. But then again, there is the constitutional aspect that is being pointed out as well. So when we talk about all of these factors and variables involved within this, how do you think that the political dynamics are then going to unfold, given the fact that eventually we are moving towards elections?
Right. Three parts to this, Sanam. The first part, if you allow me, let me also answer what Sarwar Bari Sahab was actually saying, right, regarding CCI, because that is important, and this answers your question also. The legitimacy of CCI is not determined by, you know, whether the representation from two federating units is caretaker or whether it is elected, right? This is not what it is said in the law. Essentially, it is that there has to be a chief executive that has to be present, and that is what we saw. And because of that, the notification, I think, will hold. And the biggest problem is that if the political parties, or for example, the Bar Council has gone to Supreme Court, what this might create is, remember, that right now you have a framework of time. It might end up even extending that timeline as well, because the legal battles take time, right? And especially if it is defended. Now, coming to your question regarding delimitation and the overall situation, right? I think that none of the political parties is right now ready, prepared for that matter, to participate in an election. While there is a game of chicken, especially when it comes to the optics is concerned, people are saying that they want elections early or they want election in 90 days. That is what the Constitution says, and that is what usually you have to do, unless you go to Supreme Court and you get extension of some sort, because it is Supreme Court's job to interpret law, and they can actually find some kind of relief regarding this as well. Remember some certain other numbers that we saw in Punjab. There was a date that was given and then extended, and then they were back and forth regarding that as well. There are two unfortunate, contexts here that might be complicating our reaction to how elections are going to take place, and that takes me to what Faisal was actually saying earlier. Faisal was saying that 5-6 months or more. The biggest problem is, one, the Punjab election and the way there was back and forth between the state and Supreme Court, and that actually gave the impression that there was a desire to delay elections. Then the propaganda of media itself, that first PTI has to be fixed and then you are going to hold elections. Regarding the first and the second both, I don't think that they play any role in this context at all. Delimitation has to take place, and that is an essential part of what is going to happen. It is prerogative of the Election Commission, that is, it has to decide where the delimitation actually takes place. I understand Sarwar Bari Sahab's concerns, but they are limited to what he wants rather than what the Election Commission wants, and the Election Commission has the capacity. Very quickly, I'm going to conclude.
Then
my humble submission is, with all these procedures that are going on, the best thing to go for at this time is to seek a finite time frame, rather than actually continue to keep on insisting, because clearly Article 51(5) and the other articles regarding the 90-day election and others are in conflict. And with that kind of a situation, you cannot pretend that this part of Constitution is more important than the other, right?
Right.
With that, of course, Supreme Court comes into action, and then we will see what exactly becomes of this.
So
right, and Faisal, I'll come to you. Let me just introduce our guest who's been waiting for a while. Tom O'Connor's here, senior foreign policy writer at Newsweek.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom, for joining us, and it's been a while. It's good to see you on our show. And we'll be talking about this, but let's give our friend Faisal a chance to speak about the previous segment, and I'll come back right with you.
Just the one-liner, I would fully agree with Farrukh when he says that none of the political parties are actually ready for a demand for an
they're demanding, but they're not ready.
They are not ready for the elections at all. And talking about it, the party which we saw was protesting for a whole year, even that party is not available right now.
It is in shambles right now.
It is in the shambles, and I think first of all they want to fix themselves, and that's when they want to get into election rather than simply jumping.
Very quickly,
All right.
if I was election commissioner, I would have called their bogey, and I would have held elections within 90 days, where I would have seen what becomes of their enthusiasm in elections.
Right. Let's talk about the next segment now with, of course, what is going on within India and the kind of impact that it has. And Tom, we've read what you've written for Newsweek, and we have spoken previously, of course, on our shows with regards to what is going on in Manipur, unfortunately, since May, and the kind of violent clashes that exist. But I want to also take a look at what the kind of aspects that you've highlighted and what sort of areas will this also impact beyond Manipur as well and beyond within India too. So let's first talk about the war-torn Myanmar and the way that is linked with the clashes that we're seeing in Manipur and the consequences of that for India, and then of course its relationships outside of that.
Well, you know, this conflict itself right now, it doesn't exist in its own sort of vacuum. It does absolutely have a lot to do with the regional politics, some that, of course, predate the colonial borders, which are only somewhat 76 years old or so. And what we see in Manipur specifically, of course, are the presence of tribal and ethnic communities that exist in multiple countries, and from India, Myanmar, as well as Bangladesh. So right now, especially with the ongoing civil war in Myanmar, it has only exacerbated the insecurity in the region. There have been troubles in Manipur, of course, for a very long time, for ages. But what makes this particular conflict so volatile is just the level to which both sides, and I'm talking about the Meitei people and the Kuki people predominantly, have gone to the lengths they've gone to sort of set up somewhat of almost a civil war-like state in this area, in Manipur. And of course, the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, as well as the government, has said that peace is returning to the area, but the lingering tensions have yet to be resolved. So the real threat here is that this conflict could erupt to an even greater scale and draw in potentially other powers that neighbor India, which include, of course, Myanmar predominantly, but as well as China, which has its own disputed border in the northeast Indian region, a little bit north of Manipur, of course. But it's a greater concern right now that any sort of instability here, as we've seen in other parts of the world, will not be localized.
Yeah, Tom, first of all, it was an excellent piece. Straight away I went through it and I was thumbs up for you. You know, there are certain things I was obviously thinking about after reading your piece. That was related to, we always talk about the, you know, civilizations living on rivers. There is one such river called Salween River, which comes out from obviously China. It touches three countries, China, Thailand, and then Myanmar. And of course, they have their own, you know, races that live there. Meitei, Kuki, and Chin people, they actually hail from that tradition. So can we say that today's Chinland, which is in Myanmar and is in trouble, and of course, majority of the Chin people, they were serving within the armed forces of Myanmar, and they are very fully equipped to fight their wars. And they are very well in touch with Mizoram and Manipur. So can we say that Chinland can play the pivotal role when it comes to you know, a civil war getting fueled from outside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, certainly, as you know, in Myanmar, there is a host of ethnic armed organizations. It's one of the longest-running civil wars in the world, actually. Of course, it's gotten worse since the recent events there and the political takeover of Tatmadaw. But yes, I think that certainly, of course, the Chin being part of this ongoing conflict there, yes, there is a role in insurgency and anti-government activities, and as well as certainly some pro-government activities. But what's important to remember is that for every insurgent or armed individual, self-defense force, however we want to phrase it, there are also plenty of civilians, of course, in all of these ethnic groups that are affected by this conflict. And many of them end up fleeing and trying to take refuge in other parts and across borders. And that's been a major issue for India right now. And in fact, it's gotten so bad in parts of Manipur. There are reports of some people actually fleeing Manipur into Myanmar because of the current level of conflict that we've seen there since May. So I think it's important to remember that yes, there are active factions right now, many of them along ethnic lines, as you mentioned, that cross borders, including in Myanmar. At the same time, there are civilian communities, women and children that are part of these groups that are simply seeking to live a peaceful life and try to escape violence, which unfortunately has followed them across borders.
Right. Tom, I'm glad that you wrote about it, and I'm glad that you are talking about it as well. But with whatever you are saying and Faisal are saying, I had one concern. India has a long history of externalizing its own responsibility in its domestic conflicts. Do you think that there is already a possibility that whatever happens within India's borders, India might actually try to blame others and might abdicate responsibility totally?
China?
So yes, there have been some commentators in India, some actually quite influential figures who have looked to connect this to China, for example. Obviously, there has been a lot of talk, especially from people within the Meitei community, as well as some factions of the BJP party, saying that this is a result of the Myanmar crisis, and that some people there don't belong in India. That's of course not to represent the entirety of the Indian government nor the BJP party, but there are some commentaries out there we can't ignore. And of course, there has been some pushback against this. The analysts I spoke to for the article I wrote, most of whom were from India itself, and most of whom specialized in Northeast India politics, didn't see that connection. They did not between China. Obviously there's a connection there between the Myanmar civil war. But again, the problem with the Manipur situation specifically is this weaponization of identity that's occurred on both sides, frankly, but especially from those in power, and that's a major concern when we're playing identity politics to the extent that people are actually getting hurt and killed. So yes,
right.
I think that's certainly an inflaming factor there. That's a concern.
Right, Tom. Another aspect, when you talk about the different people that you interviewed, and you quote somebody also speaking about how what is going on in Manipur is actually a positive development for China, and there may be a number of reasons of that. But can you explain exactly how that can possibly be?
Well, certainly, the official Chinese policy is to look for regional stability, and I think that more often than not, China does not want to see these sort of fires erupt too close to its borders. I think that what makes this a little different is that this conflict is, in China's mind, overshadowed by the broader India-China tensions that are playing out. So India, of course, right now is a rising power, and it's looking to equip itself with more Western equipment. Of course, traditionally it's been more in the Russian military camp, but right now it's part of the Quad. It's becoming a more active partner of the United States, and that's a major concern for China. And its own strategic sort of designs in the area, which includes South Asia and especially Southeast Asia as well. So there is this competition going on in Southeast Asia, especially between China and India. Now, China has made significant inroads in places like Myanmar as well as other countries, and India is also trying to sort of pursue these sort of relations. So any sort of instability or crises that India suffers, especially in a frontier area right near Southeast Asia, certainly could hamper its efforts towards making those inroads in this great power competition or middle power competition, depending on how we want to talk about it, situation in the region. So there is somewhat of a benefit there for China. But as a lot of people mentioned, people I spoke with included, it's difficult to connect this to a direct sort of Chinese angle that China's sort of trying to promote this. We just haven't seen that.
Regarding this rising powers and their competition, we haven't known any region in this, any country in this region where their competition is essentially kinetic so far. So the implication would be huge. But regarding what is happening in Manipur and what is happening in Myanmar, it actually, you are tracing it since May, right? But I wanted you to go back a few years when India had announced that it actually conducted surgical strike within Myanmar in consultation with the Myanmar government. So don't you think that India has the kind of golden touch when it goes for some kind of cure it actually, destabilizes the region?
And the second, Tom, reason that could obviously inflame it as well is if we talk about Manipur exclusively, of course, there are three tribes: Meitei tribe, Kuki tribe, and Naga tribe. Naga tribe is known for being militant in the past. Kuki tribe, they've always been considered as, very peaceful. Majority of them, they are, of course, Christians. And they were the real victims of Meitei tribe. Meitei tribe predominantly, of course, is larger in number, and it has the backing of BJP. And can we say that this too had a lot to do with it?
Sure. So going to the first question regarding India's counterinsurgency efforts and how they've looked to sort of stamp out conflict sometimes across their own borders. India has shown itself to be very proactive in this effort, and this goes back decades. I mean, throughout India's history, I mean, it's a large, extremely diverse country, the world's largest population. It spans a very large part of the Asian subcontinent, and so what we see is a series of times, periods of history where India has become quite proactive. And this includes sometimes cross-border. It's rare, but it happens. And you mentioned the Myanmar instance right there, and it brings in an interesting dynamic we see now between India and the Myanmar government right now, the military government, where India traditionally has supported democracy movements, say that they want to see democracy restored in Myanmar. At the same time, it does have this very close engagement with the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military government, and that's because of the mutual interest there in trying to impose some sort of semblance of border security. And it's gotten more difficult because of the conflict in Myanmar and how it's approached the Indian borders. And whether it's matters of migration, matters of drug trafficking, and matters of insurgency crossing borders. This is something that India has sought to pursue, and I think it's very notable that he did it with the sort of cooperation with the Myanmar government, because they didn't want to be seen as intruding upon extranational territory. Now, when it comes to the actual conflicts in Manipur itself and sort of the tribal makeup there, again, I think it's very tragic the way that identity has been weaponized among these various tribes, whether they're from within exclusively Manipur itself or neighboring regions across the Northeast India, the so-called Seven Sister States. And I think that, yes, each and every one of these groups has played a role in sort of trying to assert their message and portray themselves as the victim to a broader conflict going on right now. But it's something that certainly needs to be resolved within some sort of diplomatic initiative. And we've not seen that really taken, whether it's the government stepping in. We've seen limited levels of army, the Assam rifles being sent in, but it's not been able to break through that very difficult ecosystem of ethnic, religious, and political tensions that exist there.
Right, and Tom, I want to explore that further, given the fact that there's also the argument, of course, that when we take a look at the kind of political action that has existed, particularly if we talk about Manipur, it is more about a lack of will, or perhaps a move forward in terms of even encouraging such riots to the point where it benefits the political gains of the BJP, given the fact that there are upcoming elections in India next year. Do you think that this is more about the way that how deeply these differences in ethnicities are rooted within the state, or is it more about the fact that this is something that favors the current political setup in India?
Will you both allow me to actually add to this question as well? Regarding what you were earlier saying, Tom, I wanted to be very sure whether we are not confusing the causes and effects. This causal link is also important. We have seen that in the past, India keeps on saying that it is not exporting destabilizing ideologies or influences, but we have seen in Sri Lanka they wreaked havoc when there was a civil war going on there. Do you think there is a possibility that India might have a role that in the destabilization of Myanmar as well in the past?
Sure. Well, for the first question, I think that certainly both factors are at play, both the existing divides and grievances in the state, as well as the current upcoming elections. Because what's happened here is, and this happens in almost every country in the world that we see elections, is that elections and domestic politics play a factor in flaring these sort of tensions for domestic political gains, and it makes the parties just that more inflexible in wanting to pursue their goals and wanting to assert themselves to prove themselves strong. And of course, the local government Manipur is led by the BJP. There are factors there that indicate that it's played a role in wanting to assert and support the Métis community's grievances there, and that's proved a complicating factor. And then, as I said before, when the militaries come in, the federal government, and including paramilitary outfits like the Assam Rifles I mentioned earlier, the BJP also protested that, as did local police. So there does seem to be something of a self-fulfilling prophecy here, where there is concerns of rioting, there is concerns of tension spiraling out of control, and then when solutions are introduced, they're somewhat rejected, and that has been an ongoing problem here since May. Now, again, I think I do have to highlight again Prime Minister Modi's recent remarks, saying that he appealed for peace in the region. Perhaps the government is deeming that this has gone too far. We're going to have to see, I think, keep an eye out in the coming weeks and months what the government, the central government, actually does to sort of pursue goals in here. And as far as India-Myanmar relations, whether India played a role in destabilizing parts of Myanmar, I think it's difficult to say. I think that that it's again part of that very, very complex geopolitical architecture of South Asia and Southeast Asia. It's been a very difficult set of relationships, and that of course includes China as well as a major power pursuing its own interests there. I think that certainly Myanmar has had a struggle.
Right, absolutely.
As I said earlier.
Thank you, Tom. Unfortunately, we're out of time,
you.
and thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, as always, for being part of the debate. That's all we have from the show. We'll be back tomorrow with more news and updates.